Our journey to Orkney begins with the crossing of the Pentland Firth on one of the ferries that provide vital links to the islands. The sailing takes us from Scrabster in Caithness on the north coast of the Scottish mainland, past the towering rock stack of the Old Man of Hoy and the highest sea cliffs in Britain. We are heading for the little port of Stromness on the southwest coast of Orkney's largest island, which is known as the mainland. As the ferry inches its way towards the pier, we catch our first glimpse of this quaint little town with its houses built right down to the water's edge. Another day dawns over the landscape of Orkney, a county that is rich in history, culture and tradition. It is a landscape where the sea and wind have sculpted green isles into rolling fertile hills intermingled with dramatic cliff and coastline scenery. It is a landscape that fires the imagination, where the past lives with the present and where people hold proud traditions but are not slow to reach out to the future. Let us take you on a journey of exploration and wonderment through this landscape, which has inspired and nurtured the inhabitants of Orkney down through the generations. The rich, fertile soil found in Orkney's rolling landscape sustains one of the main industries of the islands, farming, with the production of beef cattle being the chief product. Throughout the year, the land is worked to its full potential and a variety of crops is grown. One of the most important of these is silage, which is used to feed the livestock over the long winter months, and the collecting of this crop is a common sight in midsummer. Scattered around Orkney's landscape, there is a great variety of farming-related buildings, some of them belonging to a bygone age. These range from water-powered meal mills that were used to grind grain, to more unusual features like this dewcot in the parish of Rendall. This was built during the 19th century to house pigeons that fed off the surrounding farmland, and which provided an alternative source of food, which, controversially, was for the sole use of the local laird. At Kirkwall Farm Museum in Bushey, an old farmhouse and the adjoining farm buildings dating from the late 1700s have been preserved and allow the visitor a glimpse into the island's past. The round tower at the end of this barn is a kiln, which was used for the drying of grain that had been thrashed during the winter months. This grain, be it of oat or bear, which is a form of barley, was then sent to the meal mills for grinding. These kilns were a prominent feature of Orkney's country architecture, and many, although no longer in use, can still be seen scattered around the countryside today. Whilst most of the farming activities in Orkney are now carried out with the aid of modern machines, there are some small farms where more traditional methods continue to be used. The gathering in of the grain harvest is an event that takes place in September and October, when the oats and sometimes bear are cut and the sheaves stacked in the fields as stooks. These stooks are left to dry, after which they are carted away and built into stacks, conjuring up memories of an era that has long since disappeared. The agricultural relics in Orkney's landscape are of an age with yesterday compared with the age of the monuments left behind by Orkney's first settlers. These ancient structures of Orkney are so numerous and widespread that nowhere else in Europe can boast of so many for each square mile of landmass. As we leave behind yesterday's face of Orkney, it is to these ancient relics that our attention is now turned. "5,000 years ago, man first made his mark on these islands. The Stone Age village of Skara Brae on the west coast of the Orkney mainland is one of the earliest known in Europe and offers a fascinating insight into our ancient past. It wasn't discovered until around 1850, when a storm blew away the sand that had kept it hidden for centuries, leaving it preserved almost as it was when it was abandoned 4,500 years ago. But it is not just the Stone Age people who have made their mark on Orkney. 2,500 years ago, the Picts arrived from the south, and the Vikings began settling here over 1,000 years ago. In the wake of the tide of history, Orkney's landscape abounds in memorials of those distant times. At the Ring of Brodgar stone circle, 60 stones were erected in a perfect ring surrounded by an earth bank and a ditch. This circle is around 4,500 years old and is one of the most impressive in Britain. Only 36 stones now remain, but this does not detract from the sense of great age and mystery that surrounds this relic of our past. The builders of Brodgar and Skara Brae are thought to have been the earliest settlers in Orkney. They also left behind other relics, one of the most beautiful of which is the Westray Stone. This is housed in the Tankernes House Museum in Kirkwall. Similar carvings have been found on stones in other parts of northern Britain and in Ireland, but so far the meanings behind such engravings are unclear, and the sculptor's intentions have been lost to us in the mists of time. The Broch of Gurness in the parish of Evie was built around 2,000 years ago, originally being in the form of a large mound. It was not until 1929 that excavators revealed the Broch and its surrounding complex of contemporary buildings. The original walls would have once stood an impressive 12 metres high and 4 metres thick. Whilst this and other brochs, like the one at Midhow on Rousey, were clearly defensive structures, it is still not certain who built them or whom they were designed to keep out. But it is clear that they indicate a troubled and possibly quite violent period in the island's history. The Earl's Palace at Bushey, built in the late 1500s, is a monument to the pretensions of the man who built it, Lord Robert Stewart, an illegitimate son of King James V. Robert was a harsh ruler, but his son Earl Patrick was even worse. The severity of his rule is spoken of in Orkney even to this day. He and his son were executed for leading a rebellion against King James VI. The palace was used only occasionally by later earls and had fallen into ruin by 1700. Standing cheek by jowl with St Magnus Cathedral in the centre of Kirkwall are the Bishop's Palace and the Earl's Palace. The latter was built by Earl Patrick Stewart shortly after 1600. It is a large but elegant structure, serving both as a castle and a palace. Even as a ruin, it is an impressive building. Its great hall, with its tall oriel windows and huge lintled fireplace, is worthy of attention, and so is this Renaissance doorway, the features of which are now badly worn away. A short distance away from the Earl's Palace is the Bishop's Palace, the earliest part of which dates from the 12th century, when Bishop William the Old wanted a residence near the cathedral, which was at that time still under construction. A large extension, including the round Mussey Tower, was added in the 1500s by Bishop Reid, and a further reconstruction took place about 1600 by the notorious Earl Patrick. Despite Earl Patrick Stuart's infamous reputation, he, along with other earls and bishops, has left behind some of the most prominent and enchanting buildings that exist in Orkney today. Kirkwall and Stromness are the only towns in Orkney, and are home to around 8,000 residents. Kirkwall was granted city status in 1486 by King James III, and many of the buildings around the old town centre date from the early 1600s, Tankernes House Museum being one of the oldest. The small port of Stromness had a long-running connection with the British whaling fleet that operated in the Davis Straits near Greenland. Before the start of every whaling season, the ships called in at Stromness to pick up many young Orkney men who, because of their skills in seamanship, were much sought after as crewmen for the whalers. It is in Kirkwall and Stromness that the people of Orkney gather to take part in a variety of cultural events that dominate the yearly calendar. Set amongst the narrow streets and a wealth of historical buildings, the people of Orkney go about their business with a conviction and vigour that stem from the quiet pride they have in their culture and in their heritage. Every year on Christmas Day and New Year's Day, Kirkwall's young men gather to play a game known as the Ba. Two sides, the Uppies and the Doonies, drawn from opposite ends of the town, compete in a free-for-all contest to be the first to get the ball, or Ba, to a predetermined part of the town. The game can often last for many hours, and it is not until the Ba reaches either the Uppies or the Doonies' specified location that the game is over. In Stromness, an annual event known as Shopping Week takes place in July and culminates in a fancy dress parade. This procession of floats, pipers and modern-day Vikings makes its way through the narrow streets to the playing fields, where judges award prizes for the best decorated floats, the themes of which are usually local issues. Much merriment surrounds this parade, but the chief purpose of raising a lot of money for charity is always achieved. Dominating the centre of Kirkwall stands the beautiful Cathedral of St Magnus. It was founded in 1137 by Earl Ronald Colson in memory of his uncle Magnus, who had been murdered 20 years earlier by his cousin Håkon, co-ruler of these islands. The story behind the event is well documented in the Orkney saga, and it is said that Magnus was killed by an axe blow to the head after returning to Orkney to put forward a claim for his share of the earldom. In 1917, during some restoration work in the cathedral, some loose stones were found high up in the pillar, standing opposite the one in which Ronald's bones were interred. Behind these stones was found a cavity containing a wooden casket. The casket contained human bones, and amongst them lay a skull that had been split by a severe blow. At some stage in its ancient history, St Magnus's Kirk had become the last resting place for Magnus's remains. The building of the cathedral stretched out over several centuries. Mason's marks found on the stonework show that some of the builders who were employed had also worked on Durham Cathedral. The beautiful red sandstone used here was quarried at the head of Holland near Kirkwall. A yellow stone, which alternates with the red in some parts of the building, is thought to have come from the island of Adi. Although it is used by a Church of Scotland congregation, the cathedral does not belong to any church. It belongs to the people of Orkney, and the Orkney Islands Council is responsible for its upkeep. Orcadians are very proud of their cathedral and generously support the local committee which raises funds for its maintenance. In the eastern transept of the cathedral can be seen the Royal Oak Memorial Plaque. It commemorates the 833 sailors who lost their lives when a German U-boat entered Scapa Flow on the 14th of October 1939 and sank the battleship Royal Oak only a few hundred yards from the shore. Listed in a book below the plaque are the names of all those who perished in this tragic event in the island's history. During the First and Second World Wars, Orkney played a crucial role in the defence of the nation. The natural harbour of Scapa Flow, surrounded as it is by small islands, became an ideal base for the North Atlantic Fleet and had to be strongly defended. Many of the relics from those troubled times still remain today. At Lyonesse on the island of Hoy, some of the buildings and works left behind by the military occupation still remain. Many are now dilapidated and falling into ruin, but with a little imagination the sounds of their past can still be heard echoing through them. More recently, some wartime artefacts have been gathered together and restored. They can be seen on display at the Scapa Flow Visitor Centre in Lyonesse. These artefacts range from cranes, guns and vehicles to the propeller that was salvaged from HMS Hampshire, which mysteriously sank off Marwick Head in Bursey while carrying Lord Kitchener on his fateful secret mission to Russia in 1916. The Naval Cemetery here at Lyonesse holds the graves of many sailors who lost their lives in or around Orkney during the two world wars. The enmities and the divisions of war are forgotten here, as friend and foe, united in death, and all of them far from home, share their last resting place on this tranquil island. Back on the Orkney mainland, evidence of the two world wars is also apparent. Between the mainland and the small islands of Bury and South Ronaldsay, ships that were destined for scrap or were war damaged were deliberately sunk to block the eastern entrances to Scapa Flow. In a one-year period, 22 vessels amounting to 50,000 tons were sunk, two more being added during the Second World War. Now rusting and being covered by encroaching sand, they offer the visitor an eerie spectacle, a constant reminder of those troubled times. Despite the presence of these block ships, a daring U-boat commander inched his way between two of the wrecks and entered Scapa Flow, where he sank the battleship Royal Oak. To make the anchorage more secure from further U-boat attack, Winston Churchill immediately gave orders for the block ships to be replaced with causeways. Now known as the Churchill Barriers, these causeways, constructed of huge amounts of rock topped with concrete blocks, link the islands of South Ronaldsay and Bury with the mainland, providing Orkney with an unexpected boon from the trials and anxieties of wartime. It was during the construction of the barriers that one of Orkney's most enduring wartime relics was built, the Italian chapel. This icon of faith sits on the small island of Lamb Home and was created by Domenico Chiocchetti, an Italian prisoner of war working on the construction of the barriers. Today, the chapel is looked after by a local committee, and due to its efforts, it remains in excellent condition. Domenico made 2 return visits to carry out restoration work, and as a result, the chapel stands proud on its little island in lasting testimony to the faith, skill, and dedication of the Italian prisoners who created it. Orkney's coastline is made up of a mixture of long sandy beaches and dramatic cliff scenery. The island of Hoy, for example, has not only the Old Man of Hoy, but also the highest sea cliffs in the British Isles. Many of the cliffs are home to a variety of seabirds. Marwick Head, for example, holds a colony of 36,000 guillemots, one of the largest in Britain. However, it is the majesty and structure of the cliffs that give rise to their real beauty. Pounded by the sea for eons, these bastions of stone appear unmoved by the rigours of time. At Yesnaby there are sea cliffs which are among the most dramatic and yet the most accessible on the Orkney mainland. A notable feature of the cliffs is the sea stack of Yesnaby Castle, which balances on a thin pillar of stone and looks as if it might topple into the sea at any moment. In South Ronaldsay can be found the secluded Windward Bay. Like Yesnabay and Marwick Head, it is home to colonies of seabirds, which, coupled with the sea stacks here, make us marvel at the richness of Orkney's environment. As the light begins to fade, we end our journey. A journey that has allowed us to glimpse a little of the beauty, the colour, the history and the magic of these islands. The setting of the sun in winter brings long, dark winter nights, but in the height of summer, the sun sets for only a short period of time, creating a seemingly perpetual twilight that lasts until sunrise. And with that sunrise comes another day in the life of Orkney, the tranquil islands set in Britain's northern seas.